Hello, and welcome to today's web seminar, The Easiest Way to Learn Test Automation, sponsored by testRigor and featuring Artem Golubov. Before our presentation begins, let me explain the console. The panel on the right has a feature to chat, ask questions, answer polls, or download the slide deck for today. If you minimize this panel, just click on the chat button to reopen it. If you experience any technical issues, please send me, Sarah Crocker, a private chat, and I'll be happy to help you. There will be a Q&A session at the end of the presentation, but feel free to enter your questions at any time throughout the presentation. Finally, to optimize your bandwidth for the best viewing experience, please close any other applications you may have running in the background. This event is being recorded and will be made available to watch on demand. Once the recording is ready, you'll get an email with instructions on accessing the presentation. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Artem.
Hello, everyone, and I don't know about you, but the system demanded I update my browser to new version, so I want to give everyone 1 more minute to join. Those the people who were technically on time but now are updating their browsers. And while we're waiting, I will be just talking about what we will be talking about. We will today talk about test automation, and this is test automation for manual testers, and this is about how you can learn to automate and what would be the easiest way to automate. And I'm joining today from San Francisco. Hello to everyone. And as a bonus, we will also go briefly through main concepts of automation. So we won't be just talking about, hey, that's the easiest way. We'll actually start doing some simple concepts. And I'll walk you through how to use absolutely free tools in order to be able to practice your automation skills. Okay, it's already 3 minutes, and let us start. Okay, so first of all, what kind of automation are we going to talk about? There are a lot of different types of automation. Today we will be talking about web and mobile automation. There is also API automation. It's a little bit different. There's IoT devices. This is a little bit different, and cars is completely something else. So we're not talking about last three. We will be talking about automation for web applications and mobile applications. And shockingly, I don't know if you know or not, but actually today in 2022, 70% of all test cases are executed manually. So this is a huge challenge for companies, and trust me, every company will be very much grateful to you if you will be able to introduce automation and help them to achieve higher test coverage, move faster, and catch more bugs at the same amount of time. Because currently, because of this issue, we have a lot of things being tested manually. It's technically impossible to test everything, because it's just inhuman amount of time, because of it resulting in $1.7 trillion losses due to software bugs worldwide. It's a huge number, and trust me, everyone wants to automate. Your interest would be aligned with your company interest. All right, but where is the Selenium? So what's the problem with the Selenium, and why are we in this situation if there is Selenium out there already? Well, it's not so simple. Uh, and I'll describe some problems which prevents people from being able to just jump on Selenium and write tons of tests. But before that, you just want to touch on like what people are ended up as a solutions, right? If it's manual, then like it's just impossible to cover everything, long cycles, and even Selenium is not very helpful because you can't rely on Selenium. It always fails literally every single time as soon as you have more than 100 tests. So it's not a total solution either. So what's the problem with Selenium in the first place? There are two large problems with the Selenium, and I'll show you the easiest way to run automation, which is much easier than Selenium, where you can learn the concept, which you can later apply with Selenium. So instead of like having this huge issue which you can't overcome, you'll be able to step by step get there. So there are two specific issues with Selenium. So number one, you have to learn programming in order to be able to use Selenium. Literally, there is no way around that. You have to become a software engineer in order to run Selenium. This is shocking because technically this is not what you need to do test automation. However, it is what it is, and as you can see, it's pretty, even simple test is pretty complex. Only engineers understand what's going on in here, and if something breaks, you need engineers to figure out why did it break. You can't just show it to other like engineers who write the code or product managers and stuff like that. You need QA engineers to understand what's going on. Even though if you look into your test cases, it's not the case, right? And when you write test cases in your test case management system or Excel spreadsheet or whatever, it's all in English, it's all understandable, and you can understand it, and everyone else can. Well, hopefully, depending how you write it, of course. And for example, testRigor will just help you to execute those. So why is that companies are actually stuck with such a low amounts of automation is because Selenium, when you write your tests, as you can see here, you're relying on low-level concepts related to how page is coded at any given moment, like IDs, names, XPaths, which is another concept you would need to learn if you want to use Selenium. And because you're hooking up to these details of implementation, how page actually coded, as opposed to how it functions from end user's perspective, as soon as pages changes ever so slightly, Selenium code will fail, and you need to spend time updating that code. So that's another hurdle in learning Selenium in the first place, because basically after some time, instead of building new tests, you have to constantly update existing tests in order to keep them working, because page changes a little bit, and now you need to spend a lot of time updating the tests. And whereas for your learning experience, it's better to use a system which does it from end user perspective, how testRigor, and does not rely on details of implementation. Actually, the problem is so bad that once you have built 350 tests with Selenium, it will be your full-time job to just maintain those tests. Of course, it's on average, like mileage vary very greatly, anywhere between tens to thousands. But on average, it's around 350, which is not that many. All right. Finally, let me get to the topic today. And what's the old way of building automation? As mentioned, is you learning programming language. Unfortunately, you can't even start learning Selenium until you learn a programming language. That's a shame, frankly speaking. And then you would need to learn automation concepts, sometimes on a job, because in a lot of cases, people just, for some reason, couldn't find it. People just don't talk about the concepts. We'll be covering those today. And since this webinar will be shared and it is in handout and this PDF you can download, we can always stay with you. You can refer to those. I'm surprised that is not that widespread. Then you'll start slowly building tests again. And before that, actually missed mentioning here is learning Selenium itself, because learning programming language wouldn't get you to Selenium, whereas a programming language, then there is Selenium. So it's two different things. Unfortunately, you can't even start learning Selenium until you are finished learning some programming. Anyway, so you'll start learning, building some tests, and then your progress will be very much slow, because you'll start spending a lot of time, as we discussed earlier, on test maintenance instead of going through new stuff and learning new things and new concepts. The new way of building test automation, and I firmly believe by 2030 it will be by far the predominant way which every company would use, is to use AI to help out to make your test building several orders of magnitude more efficient. And I mean that several orders of magnitude. So basically what will go away is the things which do not make sense, and only things which are common sense will stay. Well, first of all, you can't get around understanding the basics of automation. So there are certain concepts which you need to learn in order to be able to understand automation, in order to be able to learn automation. It does not matter what kind of tool you're using whatsoever, those automation concepts stay irregardless of anything else. Like literally, you can apply them across the board. You can learn those concepts on one tool, and then go ahead to another tool. Exactly same concepts apply. However, that should be enough to start you going. So once you understand the concepts of automation and how is it different from manual testing, that should be enough to proceed to quickly build automation tests without needing to learn a programming language. That should not be needed at all whatsoever, or at best it needs to be optional, so that you can maybe start learning it in your free time while you're already building automation. It should not be a precursor for you to start even learn automation concept. It should be something when you can expand your skills going forward. And one of the way how you can do it is dramatically reduce time spent on your test maintenance. So think about it. Remember, there is such a huge amount of test maintenance with Selenium, so that you won't really have the time to do anything else. Trust me, this is gigantic, and if you don't have to do that, then it will free time for you to do meaningful things, meaning that you can learn more, you can learn more concepts, you can practice more, and in general, just deal with common sense stuff. Moreover, you will be able to also learn certain more advanced concepts like BDD, and you can also have fun like in testRigor, for example, where you can copy paste your test cases to make them executable out of the box. So I'm sure if you are working right now as a manual testers, you have tons and tons and tons of test cases documented. It is possible with testRigor to copy paste them. It's not trivial. You will have to do something to make them work, but at the end you will be able to copy paste the test case to make it executable. All right, so bonus basics of automation. So this is concepts which are key properties of automation. There's not that many. There is a next slide. I'll talk a little bit deeper. But there is just three main properties how automating test case is different from executing test case manually. And first is automated test case needs to be repeatable. And what does it mean usually is that you need to explicitly mention things that make it automatically repeatable. The most common example being sign-up flow. If you're using, let's say, staging environment or testing, UIT, pre-prod, whatever, and you're not resetting the database every time you're going to run your tests, that means that you cannot use exactly the same email every single time you run the test, right? Even though in your manual test case it might not necessarily be mentioned, but you have to make sure that your email is always new, otherwise you wouldn't be able to complete sign up flow. And that means that you would need to use two subconcepts. That is unique test data generation. So you need to be able to generate the proper email and use the proper email every single time you go through sign up flow. And the second concept which you would need to learn is use of variables, because you would need to store that email in order to be able to check that email later on to extract verification code or click on the link in the email and so on and so forth. So those two concepts enable the key property of automation, repeatability of the test. Basically, repeatability as definition sounds very simple. So if you have a system under test and you created a test and this test ran, if your system did not change, so you didn't deploy the new version, then your automated test should be able to run again and again and again and again successfully, since it ran once. And those two subconcepts will help you to achieve it. Well, and second, variables. In certain cases, you need to store some data during the test. For example, it goes a little bit beyond repeatability, because within the same sign-up flow, which I was mentioning, once you extracted the code from that email you're getting, you should be able to use that code to enter it into the field, and therefore it's a concept of a variable. This is what is called variables. It could be called something else, but the point is the same. So what variable is de facto, you can think of it as some kind of a box. So the variable name is kind of a label on that box. So you're putting the data into that box and you're referring to that box by that label on that box. So for example, when you're doing it for email, you generated an email, you put it in a box. and there is a label on that box saying, hey, this is a generated email. And then you can refer to it to extract that email which had been generated and use it to check the email. Same with code. So you can grab the code from the screen, put it into that box. The label might say code, and then you can use this data which is in the box, referring to it by the word code, and enter it into a field saying verification code. So variables is actually a programmatic concept, and unfortunately there is no way around using those. In a lot of cases, you have to understand it. As I mentioned, the easiest way to think about it as boxes and labels on those boxes as names of those variables. And then, of course, there is data-driven testing, where you might, in some cases, have the whole spreadsheet filled with different rows of data which you need to use to test the same form, for example. In programming or in test automation, basically any tool you'll be using would allow you to use those data-driven testing in order to be able to run your test on those rows of data. And for that, again, you would need to use a concept of variable, because you would need to pass that data into variables so that in the test you can refer to it as a variable. So as you can see, those concepts are tightly related, but point being, you will be able to run the same test on multiple rows of data. And it might or might not be used right now like this in your manual testing. All right, so that's not all actually. So on top of the basics is just how to create your tests in the first place. But in order to create good tests, you need to follow best practices. And again, there are certain best practices in test automation which applies across the board, absolutely regardless what kind of tool you're using. And of course, it also applies to Selenium or anything like that. Everything I said so far applies to like either Selenium or any other tool on market, testRigor included. It's absolutely shared. Anyway, so let me quickly go through those. The test should end with a validation. It's a best practice, because if you think about it, if your test ended with you clicking on some button, you don't know if this button click succeeded unless you're validating that it actually proceeded to a new page, and new page contains information where you can confirm that you actually advanced to the new page. So this is a difference in general between just sequence of steps and a test, because in a test you have validations, and in particular it is a best practice to end the test with validation. It's quite important. So next one is test stability. Well, a vast majority of that is provided by the tool itself. However, there are certain things you would have to do to make your test stable. An example being generating unique data, for example, such that your tests are suitable to be able to run in CI/CD, meaning that we should be able. So engineers should be able to execute your test automatically on every word change. That's the whole point. And this is what you should strive for. Next best practice is tests should be very easy to understand. That is something which is very often completely missed out, but it's exceptionally important. Trust me, regardless of tool you're using, the point is to make sure people can understand what you're doing. so that a lot of people can collaborate, and collaboration, this is what makes it effective, as opposed to you building something complex, fancy, and so on and so forth. Nobody cares about that. Is the impact of you being able to write something which is easy to understand is several orders of magnitude more important than you building something that just ultra fancy. Next, best practice is test requires as little maintenance as possible. Again, tools like testRigor will help you out very greatly. And yet again, it oftentimes comes down to generating your test data in advance and like building your test in such a way that is least probable to require any maintenance at all whatsoever going forward. It's quite important. And next, finally, the test is independent and can run in parallel with other tests. As you're building the test, you'll find out eventually that you build so many tests that the amount of time needed to run them is way too long. And the way people deal with this is they started to run those tests in parallel, which is by default how testRigor, for example, run all the tests. And if you did not build them to be parallelizable or being able to run at the same time, then it's a huge problem. So you cannot enable engineers to be able to speed up execution of those tests. And the way to achieve this best practice is to be very careful with how test data is managed. It's a balancing act. In theory, you could, of course, create all the data needed by the test within the test itself. However, sometimes it is impractical because it will take a little bit too much time, so that you have to optimize and balance between how much you create and how much you rely on being in the database already, such that your test can be executed in parallel. And testRigor will basically make it very easy. And in general, like AI in general is a set of practices in software engineering which helps QA to achieve certain things, like tools use AI. Unfortunately, Selenium doesn't use AI, but almost any other tool does, and it helps with test creation, element detection, test writing assistance, and test adaptation. All right, so let me start sharing with you a small demo how you can do all of that yourself. And great. Well, first of all, I will be showing you testRigor and how to use testRigor for free in order to practice test creation and practice all of those basic concepts which I have just mentioned. Like this is testRigor.com website. There is a sign up button on the top, or you can click on Start testRigor free. Easy way you'll get into a pricing page here, and as you can see, there is a public open source free version. It is absolutely free forever. However, you have to be careful because everything you do in a free public version is public open source, will be visible to everyone and searchable on the internet. So you can click get started and register there. So once you register, you'll see that you can create new test suite. Test suite is just a set of tests grouped together where you can for the purpose of being executed together. For example, it is testing of certain environment. You might have test suite for staging environment, for certain application, for pre-production environment, for dev environment, and so on and so forth. Like those could be different test suites. And let's test something. And let's, for example, do Twitter. And I'll try to be as short as if it's possible. This is how you're creating a new test suite. You can provide username and password if you were to use username and password. In general, it's yet another best practice to keep username and password separate from code of your test, such that it could be hidden and not just in a plain text in the code of your test. So this will allow you to just separate and where's my test and where's my credentials separately. It is a security best practice. testRigor can generate some tests for you. We don't really need much. So that's simple. You're basically giving a name and the URL. So another thing that you can do to help yourself out is to install Chrome extension. So sorry about that. So if you click on resources, Chrome extension, it will lead you to Chrome Web Store and testRigor extension. And you do not have to use this way. You can go to search for Google Chrome Web Store extensions and search for testRigor there. It's another way to install that extension. It's exactly the same thing. Then you add it. It will help you out to build certain things faster and see testRigor suggested way of going through certain steps. So let us do things here. And another things that engineers have sometimes challenged with, I'll show you how to deal with very easily in testRigor, is testing emails. Anyway, so I have this extension installed here, and I'll show you the difference between the recorded steps and actual test. You'll see that pretty much there, and it would be a good way to illustrate certain new concepts. So you can start here. So let's say I want to register. The easiest way to do it is to register with email. So let's do the name. Click email instead. We'll enter some email, it doesn't matter. Because we will change that. Remember, we would need this test to be repeatable, and therefore we would need a new email every time. So it doesn't matter what I enter here right now. I'll enter whatever date here. Click next. Click next again. Click sign up, and as you can see here, it sent the email with verification code, which I would need to use. Stop recording. So testRigor tries to help out as much as it can, and it tries to detect if you're actually logged in already, so it would add login automatically, but sometimes this function misfire and it does login when it shouldn't have. So I just remove that. As you can see, so testRigor is not a record and play tool. So one of the ways to build stuff is record and play tool, but however, you're not learning anything from that because you're just recording stuff and that's it. You can execute those in majority of the tools, or like in other cases, it will produce a code and you need to be an engineer to understand that. That's not exactly the way that testRigor works. testRigor is a way it works by executing your instructions in English the way you would execute those yourself manually. So it will build these instructions. So as you can see, there is sign up here and you can enter stuff, and you need to enter email instead of this thing, and those are the steps. And I'll just click add and run. It will be added here, supposedly. Oh no, I didn't add it to the right place. 1 second. I need to check Twitter. There we go. Now it should appear. There we go. So I just canceled the execution because we would need to, it's not repeatable. I remember we would need to update this email. I can expand this. This is the code. So the good thing with testRigor is that you can, we work with the code. It's just more straightforward plain English. And you can rely on documentation here. You can click on it, it will open a new page. You can literally just search. In this case, I'll search for generate. There we go. So we have found how to generate stuff, and we need to generate email. I'll copy that. Go back. Now let's replace entering some static email with generation email. So the good thing about testRigor is that we know why you're doing certain things. Well, at least we assume we know. And the way testRigor generates emails is they are checkable. So once you generated the email, not only it is guaranteed to be unique, but also you can actually check it. You can get the actual email in that email box which you have just generated. When you're entering that email, and then you save it for future references. So next thing which we want to find is how to get the email, how to check the email. This is sending the emails, not what we want. Yeah, this looks like it. So here, so I'll copy this. As you can see, check email. And I add it in here. So what's going on here? So I went through the steps, and now I want to check the email. But I don't want to check some random email or fixed email, because remember, we have to generate a new email every single time we run. So therefore, I refer to this variable, which is, remember, this is just kind of a label on the box where you store this generated email. You can basically refer to this box again by saying saved value or stored value, if you will. And you extract that email. And now this command that says check that email was received actually goes into that email and reads it and you can present, it will be presented to you. It will be actually rendered for you as a page. So let's update and retest. So once again, that command is not just check the email, it will render it for you. And the way why you can check this email is because when you use generate command in testRigor to generate the email, it generates the email such that it could be checked later on. There we go. So we checking along here, entering the name, click use the mail, going through here, click sign up. This is our email. It's a long email intentionally. And voila, Twitter did send us email pretty quickly. And this is how it looks like. Now, what we want to do is we want to actually get that code and enter it into verification code, because this is what Twitter asked us for. For that, since we kind of a little bit short on time and I want to make sure everybody has a chance to ask questions, I'll just type it in here. But what we need to do is we need to grab value. So we'll do grab value. And there are two ways how we can refer to that text. You can either refer to it below certain element, or you can refer to this code by a template. I'll just refer it as a relative location from text below this verification code and save it as code. And then we switch to tab 1 at by index, it's the first tab, and then we enter saved value code, which we grabbed from the email into verification code. Okay, let's update it and see how that's going to work. So basically what we did in here is we updated our test such that it now grabs the text from the email which we received. And in this case, look at it. So there's a sign up button instead of that long thing. So we can say or sign up. Anyway, so we updated it, and now what we're doing is that once we render it, this email, we will be grabbing this text below this another text. Like we need the code, we will be grabbing that code from the email, and then we will be switching back to Twitter and entering this code which we grabbed into verification code input. All right, let's see how that's going to go. So this is our email, and as you can see, it highlighted our text and highlighted everything that is below. It grabbed the first text from below this, and we switched back to Twitter, and when we enter it, let's check it's the same code, this 221.107, and what it was in the mail is 221.107, so it did work. So this is an example how you can automate things which are probably on your plate because engineers consider them unautomatable. But most importantly, it is the way to refer and use the concept. You can practice your concepts of automation. In this case, it's repeatability with unique data generation, and 2 times it is using of variables, basically, as you can see here. So this will help you to play with it. As I mentioned, it is free. As soon as you're okay, everything will be shared, which is a good thing because you can share it yourself with your boss and say, hey, look, this is how it worked. Or like someone else you would like. But point being, it is the easiest way to play and learn automation concepts. And on that, I would like to switch back to Sarah. And don't hesitate to find me on LinkedIn, connect with me. I'm always happy to connect with people on LinkedIn. Sarah, please.
Yeah. Did anybody have questions that they wanted to enter in? All right. maybe not. Well, I do thank everyone for joining us today. This will conclude our web seminar. Huge thank you to Artem for your time and to testRigor for sponsoring. And a special thank you out to our audience for spending your time with us. We hope to see you at a future event. Have a great day. Oh, well, we just got a question. Oh, you've already answered it. Oh, I have a question from Cece. How are objects identified?
The testRigor is a tool that emulates how human would do it. So basically, once it is on a page, it waits until a page will stop changing from end user's perspective, and then it immediately would ask a browser for all visible elements on the screen with the coordinates and sizes, and then it will use that information to understand what you're saying and execute what you're instructing it to the way a human would do it. So it's basically just automatically grabbing visible elements on a page.
All right, and Cece also asked, is it based on XPath or some AI processes?
So let me, I guess, share my screen to answer that question. So if, do you remember this code which we've written here? In no shape or form we used any XPath or anything here whatsoever. Moreover, you can store this text in your Git or copy it, create new test suite, paste it, and it will still run exactly the same way. So the value of testRigor is it makes tests several orders of magnitude more stable by avoiding using XPaths, IDs, CSS selectors, and so on and so forth. There is no magic on how exactly we do that. It's all based on visible elements. There are certain AI which we do to make things a little bit more human-like. For example, on this screen, there are texts above the input, and testRigor will use our AI to automatically understand that the text above this input is actually associated and is considered quote-unquote label to this input, even though it might be no relevance whatsoever in the code. However, tomorrow this text might be on the left. As soon as you as a human can identify that this input is the first name input, testRigor will be able to do so. Same thing with a placeholder. It could be changed from being a text to being placeholder. Again, as soon as you as a human can identify this is the right input, testRigor will do the same using exactly the same logic as you do as a human tester. So basically, you can think of testRigor as a human emulator. You're just giving commands as this to this kind of human emulator, like or a minion, if you will, and it will execute it for you how a human would do it. Let me see if there are other questions. Any suggestion for how to do web component testing in design system projects? Gifu, please go ahead and register, and as soon as you're providing the URL, you should be able to access the stuff. The thing is, though, if a system under test is in your VPN, you would need to work with testRigor in order to establish a channel, or work with us to get the whole testRigor and deploy within your VPN. that is also supported. How testRigor is compared with Transcentis Tosca? Well, as you can see, all you do in testRigor is just write text in English, so it makes it kind of a little bit easier to deal with, definitely easier to understand, and most importantly, orders of magnitude less effort on maintaining it in case of if application changes. But it's just easier to play with, and you have free version available with servers to execute your test for free. Does it support desktop application? It supports desktop application browsers, and we will support desktop native applications soon. Please stay tuned. testRigor can do web and mobile, and it can do web and mobile and API in the same test, similar how we did here, email and desktop web in the same test. How will it validate field appear for entry based on the data entered in another field? Like how to validate field appears based on data entered in another field? Well, first of all, you can just enter the field. So testRigor automatically detects, well, it rereads the page and it gets a new page version of every time after you do any kind of entry whatsoever. That is important because the assumption is you can select, for example, United States as a country, and then a new drop-down will appear allowing you to select state. So that's expected modern operation. So it will just work out of the box. In order to verify that the field is visible, you can write a command, check that page contains let's say if you're validating for states input. So the word input means that it is specifically an input field, or you can say edit in there, and not just a text somewhere on the screen. So it will fail, it just would be a text, and it will succeed if there is actually a field where you can edit that. Enter the data. Does the tool allow customizations? Oh, yes. So in testRigor is basically technically a superset of Selenium. You can do exactly the same thing as you can do in Selenium, and much more than that. And it does allow you to do customizations. You can actually create what we call rules, you might call functions, and give it arbitrary names. But you can also use literally programming to create those functions. So you can extend it as much as you'd like. It's just testRigor makes it much easier to do so. And let me see if there are any more questions.
I think you got them all from chat and Q&A.
Yep. It looks like those are all the questions.
Okay. Well, then we'll try that again. Thank you so much for everyone who attended today. Thank you to Artem and to testRigor for this web seminar topic, which was very popular. Thank you, everybody, for joining. We hope to see you at a future event. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.